What if everything we know about history is wrong? Imagine this. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, yet the story we tell ourselves only stretches back a blink of an eye. Human civilization, cities, technology, barely 6,000 years. But what if we aren't the first to rise up and conquer this planet? What if there were others, long before us, who built, who thrived, and who vanished without a trace? It sounds like science fiction, but cracks in the official story keep surfacing in the most unsettling places. In ancient layers of rock, scientists have found strange metallic spheres that shouldn't exist. In the fossil record, entire chapters appear to be missing, as though time itself skipped forward, leaving nothing but mysteries behind. Even the very air we breathe carries whispers of something engineered, manipulated, controlled, not by us but perhaps by someone who came before. And when you look closely, the coincidences begin to pile up. Sudden spikes of carbon that resemble modern emissions, synthetic materials buried in sediments millions of years old, and extinction events that feel less like accidents and more like targeted reset. The deeper you dig, the more you start to wonder if Earth has hosted not one, but several civilizations that played their game, left their mark, and were erased by forces we barely understand. Yet their fingerprints remain subtle, buried, and easy to dismiss until you line them up. And once you do, the picture becomes chilling. This isn't just about fossils and rocks. This is about a cycle, one that might already be repeating itself with us. Because if the past holds the key to what happened before, then the future may already be written. There are moments in science when a discovery is so strange, so completely out of place, that it shakes the foundations of what we think we know. The first time geologists stumbled across microscopic metallic spheres embedded deep inside layers of rock that were tens of millions of years old, they were forced to confront one of those moments. These weren't random mineral formations or natural crystallization. They were perfectly spherical, metallic in composition, and unlike anything nature should have been able to produce in that context. To make things even more unsettling, their chemical structure bore a disturbing resemblance to the byproducts of modern nuclear explosion. Imagine that, evidence of something resembling nuclear fallout, locked away in rocks that predated humanity by tens of millions of years. The official explanation offered was that maybe these spheres were the result of meteor impacts, their intense heat vaporizing metals that later cooled into perfect little beads. It's a neat theory, one that fits comfortably inside our accepted version of history. But as researchers dug deeper, they began to notice that these spheres weren't isolated to a single site. They turned up in multiple layers of sediment across different continents, and in time periods far too spread out to be explained by just one asteroid or cosmic event. The precision, the uniformity, and the way they clustered in specific strata hinted at something far more complex than chance. It was as if the Earth itself was trying to whisper a story long forgotten, a story of fire and technology that had already played out once before. Skeptics argue, of course, that humans have a tendency to see patterns where none exist. We want to believe in mysteries, in hidden civilizations, in lost histories, but these spheres are physical, tangible, and measurable. They aren't the kind of thing you can dismiss as a trick of the eye or a cultural myth passed down through generations. They exist, and their existence demands answers. If they were the byproduct of some industrial process, then who or what was running factories millions of years before humans appeared? If they were the residue of weapons testing, then whose hands were on the trigger? And if neither explanation holds, then why do they mirror so closely the very substances we produce today through advanced technology? Every attempt to dismiss them leads to more questions than answers, and each question tugs at the threads of a narrative that refuses to stay hidden. The deeper you look into Earth's strata, the stranger it gets. Geology is like a time machine, each layer of rock recording a snapshot of the planet's history. Normally, what you find makes sense. Volcanic ash from ancient eruptions, fossils of creatures long extinct, chemical traces that mark slow environmental shifts. But every so often, something shows up that seems to scream of an intelligence at work. In the same layers where these metallic spheres are found, scientists have occasionally detected chemical anomalies, carbon isotopes that rise and fall in ways eerily similar to our modern emissions from burning fossil fuels. It's as if some ancient industry once pumped pollutants into the sky, only to vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a signature that echoes faintly through the ages. This alone should be enough to make us pause, to reconsider the arrogance of assuming we are the first and only species to harness the power of technology. But instead, most of these findings are brushed aside, filed under curiosities that don't fit the mainstream narrative. And maybe that's the easiest way to deal with them: pretend they don't exist. Because the alternative forces us to confront a truth we may not be ready to face. What makes these metallic spheres even more compelling is their sheer durability. Natural processes break down over time. Erosion wears mountains to dust, rivers carve valleys, tectonic shifts bury entire landscapes. Yet these tiny orbs endure, resistant to corrosion, as though designed to outlast the very civilizations that may have forged them. Think about what that means. If a civilization knew it might one day disappear, it could have created markers, artifacts engineered to withstand not just centuries, but millions of years. Could these spheres be a kind of time capsule, a deliberate attempt to say, we were here to whatever life would one day rise after them? If so, then we are the recipients of a message far older than our species, a message we are only now beginning to decode. And the spheres aren't the only example of impossible evidence. Across the globe, archaeologists have occasionally unearthed objects so far out of place that entire volumes have been dedicated to cataloguing them as anomalous artifacts, pieces of metal embedded in coal seams that formed hundreds of millions of years ago, perfectly machined components buried in strata that should have been untouched by any hand, human or otherwise. One of the most famous is a set of metallic objects discovered in Russia's Ural Mountains, tiny spiraled coils no larger than a fraction of a millimeter, yet crafted with a precision that modern micro-machining technology would envy. Tests dated them to tens of thousands of years old, far beyond the capabilities of any known culture at that time. Some even claim they could be millions of years old, trapped in sediments laid down in epochs when our ancestors were still little more than primates scurrying through forests. The official explanations waver between contamination, natural crystallization, and outright hoax. But when independent labs confirm their existence and document their metallurgical composition, copper, tungsten, molybdenum, the excuses start to ring hollow. If these weren't made by us, then who made them? And if they're natural, why do they mimic the design of components we use in aerospace engineering and electronics today? The unsettling truth is that the deeper we dig, the more these fragments appear, scattered like breadcrumbs across the vast timeline of Earth's history. Each one alone might be dismissed as coincidence, but together they form a pattern too clear to ignore, a pattern that suggests intelligence, technology, and intent. Imagine a detective arriving at a crime scene and finding fingerprints, footprints, and DNA samples. Any one of them might be explained away, but taken together, they tell a story. Earth's rocks and fossils are that crime scene, and the evidence points to the possibility that someone or something was here long before us, leaving behind traces that stubbornly refuse to vanish. The question then becomes, why don't we hear more about these anomalies? Why aren't they headline news, reshaping our understanding of human history? The answer lies in how science operates. Paradigms are protective. Once a narrative is established, anything that challenges it is treated as a threat. The idea that advanced civilizations could have existed millions of years ago doesn't just stretch our imagination. It shatters it. It forces us to rethink evolution, archaeology, and even our place in the cosmos. So the anomalies are quietly catalogued, explained away, or ignored. But ignoring evidence doesn't erase it. The spheres still sit in their layers, the coils still rest in museum drawers, and the isotopic signatures still hum their quiet warning from the rocks. They are the silent testimony of a past that refuses to stay buried. And if these fragments are real, then the implications are staggering. It means Earth may not just be the cradle of human civilization, it may be the graveyard of civilizations that came before. Civilizations that rose, advanced, and collapsed long before we ever walked upright. Civilizations that perhaps reached heights we can barely imagine, only to vanish in cataclysms that erased nearly every trace of their existence. The spheres, the coils, the isotopes, these are their ghosts, haunting us from the deep past, daring us to acknowledge them. And once you see them for what they are, you can never go back to believing in the simple linear story of history we were taught. You begin to realize that we may be part of a cycle, one that has played out again and again on this planet, and one that may be playing out right now with us. In 1980, two scientists, Luis Alvarez, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and his son Walter, a geologist, made a discovery that rewrote history. They were studying a thin layer of clay found in multiple locations around the globe, a layer no more than a few centimeters thick, but present everywhere from Italy to New Zealand. On the surface, it looked unremarkable, just another layer in Earth's endless geological book. But when they analyzed it, they found something shocking, an unusually high concentration of iridium. On Earth, iridium is rare, buried deep in the mantle, but in asteroids and comets, it's far more common. The Alvarez team realized what they were looking at wasn't just dirt, it was evidence of a cataclysm, the fallout from an asteroid impact so massive it darkened the skies, altered the climate, and drove the dinosaurs to extinction. That thin clay was proof that Earth's surface could preserve catastrophic events with incredible precision, a message carried across millions of years, waiting for someone with the right tools to decode it. If a single asteroid strike could leave such a clear fingerprint across the entire planet, then what else could be recorded in these layers? And more importantly, what would those records tell us about the possibility of civilizations before our own? This is where the so-called Silurian hypothesis comes in, an idea proposed by scientists not as a conclusion but as a thought experiment. If an advanced civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we even be able to detect it now? The Alvarez discovery showed that the Earth has a memory. It can record sudden, violent changes. It can capture signatures that last long after the event is gone. But the fossil record is patchy at best, like a book with most of its pages torn out. Entire epochs vanish in silence, and sudden bursts complexity, like the Cambrian explosion, appear without a gradual build-up. It makes you wonder, are we looking at natural processes, or are we seeing the faint echoes of something else, something that doesn't fit the neat, linear story we've been told? Think about how fragile human civilization really is. If every city on Earth were destroyed tomorrow, if every skyscraper crumbled, every satellite fell, every car and plane rusted away, how long would our traces last? A few thousand years would erase most of it, 1,000,000 years would bury nearly everything, and 10 million years, even the most durable materials would degrade, leaving behind only the most resistant markers, radioactive isotopes, subtle chemical anomalies, a few stubborn synthetic compounds. If a future species dug into our strata millions of years from now, they wouldn't find skyscrapers, they'd find a layer of plastics embedded in sediments, unusual carbon signatures that mirror industrial activity, and radioactive residues from our experiments with nuclear power. To them, we'd be nothing more than a mystery, a ghost civilization revealed only through scattered evidence. Now turn that logic around. If we know our own existence would leave behind only faint signatures, then why wouldn't those same faint signatures already be present from civilizations long before us? The Alvarez discovery matters because it proved Earth is a historian, a silent archivist of catastrophe. The asteroid strike that killed the dinosaurs was not erased. It's written in rock, preserved like a message in a bottle. So when scientists began noticing other anomalies, layers of carbon dioxide spikes, abrupt climate shifts, isotopic changes, it was only natural to ask, are these natural fluctuations or are they signs of something else? The Silurian hypothesis challenges us to stop assuming we're the first. Maybe other civilizations rose and fell, their existence reduced to thin, nearly invisible lines in the geologic record, lines we've been overlooking because we weren't trained to see them as evidence of intelligence. What makes this even more compelling is how selective the fossil record truly is. Less than 1% of all species that have ever lived are preserved as fossils, and even then, the conditions have to be just right. Soft-bodied creatures almost never fossilize. Plants vanish without a trace. Entire ecosystems can come and go, and if no one was there to turn them into stone, they're gone forever. Now apply that to civilizations. Cities are fragile, roads crumble, steel corrodes, the oceans rise and erase coastlines. If humanity vanished today, within 10,000 years, the forests would reclaim our highways, rivers would cut through our neighborhoods, and skyscrapers would fall into dust. 1,000,000 years later, no one would ever guess that Manhattan or Tokyo ever existed. The only evidence would be buried in chemistry, in isotopes and anomalies, detectable only through careful study. If our record is so fragile, then why should we assume we'd easily spot the record of someone else's civilization? The Alvarez layer proves one thing beyond doubt. Catastrophic events leave legacies, but it also opens the door to a darker question. If asteroids leave signatures, what about industries? What about technologies? Could an ancient industrial age have left its own iridium layer, its own chemical fingerprint? The Silurian hypothesis suggests that if it did, we might already have mistaken it for something else. Maybe those sudden carbon spikes weren't random. Maybe those strange isotopes we chalk up to volcanism were something more. The Earth doesn't care who creates the signature asteroid, volcano, or intelligent species. It records them all the same, and it hides them all the same, until someone decides to look deep. And yet, despite all this, the idea of ancient civilizations is often dismissed as fringe, a fantasy for science fiction rather than science. Why? Because it threatens the narrative of human exceptionalism. We like to think we're unique, the pinnacle of evolution, the first and only species to harness fire, electricity and atomic power. But the rocks don't lie, and when they tell stories that don't fit our worldview, we have a choice: ignore them or listen. The Alvarez discovery forced us to listen once, rewriting the history of dinosaurs and asteroids. Maybe it's time to listen again, to entertain the possibility that history is not as empty as we think. What's most fascinating is how subtle the evidence might be. The iridium layer was only centimeters thick, yet it told the story of the greatest extinction in history. If that's all it takes to prove a world-shattering event, then how small might the evidence be for a lost civilization? A few grams of synthetic polymer, a cluster of isotopes in the wrong place, a fossilized microchip mistaken for a stone. We've always assumed that the absence of cities in the fossil record proves there were no cities. But maybe cities were never meant to survive deep time. Maybe only the faintest chemical whispers remain, like the iridium that told us of the asteroid. The question is, do we have the courage to interpret those whispers differently? The Alvarez team didn't set out to rewrite history, they stumbled into it, and that may be the lesson here. Sometimes the biggest truths are hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to ask the right question. If an asteroid can leave a signature for 65 million years, then the actions of a civilization, however advanced, might also leave a signature however faint. And if that's true, then the great question is not whether civilizations existed before us, but how many cycles have played out. How many rises and collars are hidden in the silence of the rocks. And most importantly, are we destined to be just another thin line of clay in Earth's story? The fossil record is often described as the great archive of life on Earth, a ledger that carefully documents the rise and fall of species across billions of years. But the truth is, this archive is riddled with missing pages, torn chapters, and long silences that no one can fully explain. When you look closely at what we actually have, the fossil record is less like a complete history book and more like a fragmented collection of snapshots, some vivid and detailed, others blurry, and many more missing entirely. For every Tyrannosaurus skull proudly displayed in a museum, there are millions of species that lived and died without leaving behind so much as a trace. That's the uncomfortable reality. The vast majority of life leaves no fossils at all. The right conditions have to align perfectly. Sediment burying a body quickly, minerals replacing bone, pressure and time preserving the remains until they are discovered. Most creatures, plants, and entire ecosystems vanish without a whisper. If that is true of natural life, then what chance would an ancient civilization have of leaving a permanent record? Cities are not designed to fossilize. Skyscrapers don't turn into stone. Roads don't naturally embed themselves into strata. Almost everything we build crumbles, burns, erodes, or gets swallowed by the relentless churn of plate tectonics. 10,000 years from now, our world might already look like it never existed. 10 million years from now, even the most stubborn remnants would likely be erased, and yet humanity acts as though the fossil record's silence is proof that nothing came before it. The gaps are the most telling part. One of the most striking mysteries is the Cambrian explosion, a sudden burst of life about 40 million years ago, when complex organisms appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Before this point, life was relatively simple, microscopic or soft-bodied. Then, within a geological blink, you suddenly see creatures with hard shells, eyes, segmented bodies, and complex structures. Paleontologists try to explain it through environmental shifts, genetic innovations, or oxygenation events, but none of these explanations fully account for the sheer speed and scale of this evolutionary leap. It looks less like a slow build-up and more like someone flipped a switch. If life on Earth is supposed to crawl forward at a glacial pace, what explains this sudden explosion of complexity? Some argue it's simply the moment when conditions favored fossilization, meaning complex life could have existed earlier but wasn't preserved. But others see something far more mysterious, a possible intervention, a push that accelerated the process in ways we can't yet understand. If we're willing to entertain the idea that civilizations might have existed long before us, could the Cambrian explosion be evidence of influence, either from Earth itself or from beyond it? Was life nudged forward, guided into complexity, or even engineered? The gaps don't end there. Throughout Earth's history, mass extinctions carve sharp divides in the fossil record. Entire families of creatures disappear, replaced by entirely new groups that rise seemingly out of nowhere. The Permian-Triassic extinction wiped out 90% of marine life and 70% of terrestrial species. The Cretaceous extinction ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Each event left behind not only a record of loss, but also an opportunity. In the voids left by catastrophe, new species emerged, often with sudden adaptations that feel almost too convenient. The question becomes, are these natural resets random rolls of evolutionary dice, or are they signs of something more deliberate, cycles of destruction and renewal that might be orchestrated? If advanced civilizations had risen and fallen during these intervals, the fossil record would likely look exactly as it does now. Long gaps, sudden disappearances, abrupt appearances. The silence of the record might not prove there were no civilizations. It might prove how completely they were erased. Even when fossils exist, interpretation is a matter of perspective. A pile of bones can be reconstructed into many different creatures depending on assumptions. Likewise, a chemical anomaly in rock can be explained away as volcanism, meteor impacts, or industrial byproducts. The bias lies not in the rocks, but in the stories we choose to tell about them. Right now, the dominant story is that humans are the first intelligent species on Earth. That belief shapes how we interpret every anomaly, every gap, every unexplained leap. But what if that belief is wrong? What if those gaps are exactly what we'd expect to see if civilizations had once existed and vanished, leaving only the faintest traces behind? What if the missing chapters aren't missing at all, but deliberately erased by time, catastrophe, or even design? Consider this. The oldest known tools made by humans are only a few million years old, tiny scratches against the surface of deep time. Yet life on Earth stretches back billions of years. That leaves a nearly incomprehensible span of time, billions of years, where anything could have happened. Civilizations could have risen and fallen 100 times, and we would never know because their bones, their buildings, and their artifacts would be long gone. The fossil record would remain mostly silent, offering us only hints through chemical signatures, anomalies, and inexplicable bursts of complexity. Our arrogance blinds us to this possibility. We assume absence of evidence is evidence of absence. But the fossil record itself warns us not to jump to that conclusion. Its gaps are proof not of nothingness, but of fragility. The story of Earth is one written in vanishing ink, fading almost as soon as it is written. And then there are the oddities that surface, the fossils and artifacts that don't quite fit, human-like footprints found in strata supposedly millions of years older than humanity, tools embedded in coal seams, geometrically perfect spheres discovered in mines. Each one is dismissed, explained away as misidentification, contamination, or hoax. And yet they keep showing up, like the metallic spheres buried in ancient layers. They resist easy explanation. They are the kind of anomalies that, taken individually, are shrugged off, but taken together, whisper of a deeper truth we don't want to face. The fossil record is not a perfect book. It is a puzzle with missing pieces, and sometimes the pieces we do have don't fit the picture we've been told to assemble. The most haunting part of all this is how well the pattern mirrors our own reality. If humanity were to vanish tomorrow, the fossil record would one day show a sudden disappearance of countless species, ours included, followed by the rise of something new. There would be a thin layer of anomalies, plastics, carbon spikes, radioactive isotopes. Future paleontologists might look at that layer and wonder what happened. Was it volcanism, climate change, a cosmic event? Would they even consider the possibility of a civilization, or would they dismiss it as too improbable, too unscientific, just as we do today? Our own potential erasure offers the key to understanding those gaps in the past. The record doesn't preserve everything, and what it does preserve is easy to misinterpret if you aren't willing to imagine the unimaginable. The gaps in the fossil record are more than empty spaces. They are invitations. They challenge us to consider what might lie between the pages, what stories were written and erased before we ever came along. They remind us that history is not a straight line but a cycle, one that may have turned many times before. The Cambrian explosion, the sudden disappearances, the abrupt appearances, all of these could be natural, or they could be something else entirely. Signs of civilizations lost to time, wiped clean by catastrophe, their only legacy, the silence of the rocks. And as we stare into that silence, we must ask ourselves, are we the first to wonder about it, or just the latest? 2 billion years ago, something happened that forever changed the trajectory of life on Earth. It's called the Great Oxidation Event, and at first glance it might sound like just another step in the planet's natural evolution. Oxygen began to build up in the atmosphere, transforming a world once dominated by methane and carbon dioxide into something closer to the air we breathe today. But if you pause for a moment, the scale of this event becomes staggering. Before it, oxygen was toxic to most life forms. Microbes that had thrived in a low-oxygen world suddenly faced extinction as this strange new gas spread across the globe. It was, quite literally, an atmospheric apocalypse. Imagine living in a world where the very air turned poisonous. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Countless species were wiped out. Yet, from this chaos came opportunity. Oxygen paved the way for more complex organisms to evolve. Multicellular life, larger bodies, higher energy metabolism, all of it became possible only because oxygen was present in abundance. It wasn't just a change, it was a reset, a rewriting of the rules of life itself. Scientists generally explain this event through the activity of cyanobacteria, tiny photosynthetic organisms that began producing oxygen as a byproduct of their metabolism. Over millions of years, their collective output reached a tipping point, the atmosphere flipped, and the stage was set for the evolution of new forms of life. But here's the unsettling question: what if this wasn't entirely natural? What if this dramatic shift bore the fingerprints of intention? The Great Oxidation Event doesn't look like a slow, steady process. It looks abrupt, almost engineered, like the deliberate release of a chemical into the environment to trigger a specific result. In modern times, we've begun experimenting with geoengineering, altering the atmosphere to combat climate change, seeding clouds, capturing carbon, and even considering ways to release reflective particles into the sky to cool the planet. If we're capable of thinking this way now, why couldn't a civilization billions of years ago have attempted something similar on a far grander scale? The more you study the oxygen event, the stranger it becomes. Oxygen didn't just rise gradually and peacefully, it surged, spiked, dipped, and surged again in a pattern that suggests complex feedback systems at work. The chemical record shows bursts of oxygenation followed by periods of decline, almost as if someone were tweaking the balance, adjusting variables, fine-tuning the atmosphere until it reached a new equilibrium. Was this the product of microbes alone, or was something more deliberate at play? Could there have been a guiding hand behind the transition, an ancient intelligence experimenting with atmospheric chemistry to prepare the planet for future life? The idea may sound radical, but it gains weight when you consider what oxygen did to Earth's biosphere. By wiping out anaerobic organisms and clearing space for new life forms, it set the stage for complexity to flourish. It's as if the planet was rebooted, its operating system upgraded from a primitive version to something capable of running far more advanced programs. And just like an upgrade, it came at a cost. Old systems were rendered obsolete, while new systems thrived. If this was intentional, it would suggest a civilization capable not only of understanding planetary systems, but of manipulating them on a scale we can barely comprehend. It would mean that Earth itself was treated as a kind of laboratory, its environment reshaped to serve a higher purpose. There are other hints that add to the mystery. For example, banded iron formations, those striking layers of iron-rich rock found around the world, are direct evidence of oxygen interacting with the oceans. Before oxygen could build up in the air, it first had to saturate the seas, binding with dissolved iron to form rust that settled to the ocean floor. This created vast deposits of iron ore, resources that humanity now mines to fuel its own industries. But the way these formations appear is peculiar. The layering suggests pulses of oxygenation, sudden events rather than a uniform process. It's as though someone was running experiments. Introduce oxygen, observe the effect, Pause, adjust, try again, over and over, until the atmosphere flipped for good. If it were a natural microbial process, why would it be so stop and start, so experimental in appearance? The record reads less like the work of chance and more like the iterations of design. Consider also what oxygen enabled. With its rise came the potential for energy-intensive metabolisms, for creatures that could move faster, grow larger, and develop more complex structures. Without oxygen, brains as we know them could never have evolved. Intelligence itself depends on oxygen-rich energy production. In a sense, the Great Oxidation Event was the prerequisite for consciousness. It was the doorway through which intelligence had to pass to exist. If that's the case, then doesn't it seem strange how perfectly timed it was? Too early, and the planet might not have been ready. Too late, and life might have stagnated in simplicity forever. Instead, it happened precisely when it could set the stage for everything that followed, including us. Coincidence or something else? Skeptics would argue there's no need to invoke intention. Evolution is full of strange leaps, and the oxygen event is simply one of them. But if we frame this within the larger pattern, the metallic spheres, the isotopic anomalies, the fossil record gaps, it becomes harder to dismiss. Each anomaly on its own may be explainable, but together they form a tapestry that hints at design, at interference, at cycles far older than humanity. The Great Oxidation Event may not have been the birth of life as we know it, but it was certainly a rebirth, a dramatic transformation that feels less like chance and more like purpose. And think of what this implies for our own future. Right now, we're altering the atmosphere again, flooding it with carbon dioxide, methane, and synthetic chemicals. We are creating what some geologists already call the Anthropocene, a distinct layer in Earth's history that future beings could detect millions of years from now. To them, it might look exactly like the oxygen event looks to us. A sudden atmospheric change, a radical departure from the baseline, a clear signal that something intelligent was at work. In other words, the Great Oxidation Event might not just be a mystery from the past, it might be a mirror, showing us what the legacy of our own civilization will look like when time has buried us. The haunting part is this: if civilizations rise and fall in cycles, each altering the planet in ways detectable only through chemistry, then maybe the oxygen event was not the first time, and certainly not the last. Maybe it was just one in a series of atmospheric signatures, each marking the rise of a civilization that came, experimented, transformed, and then vanished. We may be standing in the middle of one of those cycles right now, oblivious to how familiar it might look in the distant future. The Great Oxidation Event stands as both a warning and a reminder. It tells us that the atmosphere is not just a passive background, it is an active participant in the story of life, one that can be rewritten suddenly, violently, and perhaps deliberate. And if it was rewritten once before, then who's to say it won't be rewritten again? 2 billion years ago, something happened that forever changed the trajectory of life on Earth. It's called the Great Oxidation Event, and at first glance, it might sound like just another step in the planet's natural evolution. Oxygen began to build up in the atmosphere, transforming a world once dominated by methane and carbon dioxide into something closer to the air we breathe today. But if you pause for a moment, the scale of this event becomes staggering. Before it, oxygen was toxic to most life forms. Microbes that had thrived in a low-oxygen world suddenly faced extinction as this strange new gas spread across the globe. It was, quite literally, an atmospheric apocalypse. Imagine living in a world where the very air turned poisonous. Entire ecosystems collapsed, countless species were wiped out. Yet, from this chaos came opportunity. Oxygen paved the way for more complex organisms to evolve. Multicellular life, larger bodies, higher energy metabolism, all of it became possible only because oxygen was present in abundance. It wasn't just a change, it was a reset, a rewriting of the rules of life itself. Scientists generally explain this event through the activity of cyanobacteria, tiny photosynthetic organisms that began producing oxygen as a byproduct of their metabolism. Over millions of years, their collective output reached a tipping point. The atmosphere flipped, and the stage was set for the evolution of new forms of life. But here's the unsettling question: what if this wasn't entirely natural? What if this dramatic shift bore the fingerprints of intention? The Great Oxidation Event doesn't look like a slow, steady process. It looks abrupt, almost engineered, like the deliberate release of a chemical into the environment to trigger a specific result. In modern times, we've begun experimenting with geoengineering, altering the atmosphere to combat climate change, seeding clouds, capturing carbon, and even considering ways to release reflective particles into the sky to cool the planet. If we're capable of thinking this way now, why couldn't a civilization billions of years ago have attempted something similar on a far grander scale? The more you study the oxygen event, the stranger it becomes. Oxygen didn't just rise gradually and peacefully. It surged, spiked, dipped, and surged again in a pattern that suggests complex feedback systems at work. The chemical record shows bursts of oxygenation, followed by periods of decline, almost as if someone were tweaking the balance, adjusting variables, fine-tuning the atmosphere until it reached a new equilibrium. Was this the product of microbes alone, or was something more deliberate at play? Could there have been a guiding hand behind the transition, an ancient intelligence experimenting with atmospheric chemistry to prepare the planet for future life? The idea may sound radical, but it gains weight when you consider what oxygen did to Earth's biosphere. By wiping out anaerobic organisms and clearing space for new life forms, it set the stage for complexity to flourish. It's as if the planet was rebooted, its operating system upgraded from a primitive version to something capable of running far more advanced programs. And just like an upgrade, it came at a cost. Old systems were rendered obsolete, while new systems thrived. If this was intentional, it would suggest a civilization capable not only of understanding planetary systems, but of manipulating them on a scale we can barely comprehend. It would mean that Earth itself was treated as a kind of laboratory, its environment reshaped to serve a higher purpose. There are other hints that add to the mystery. For example, banded iron formations, those striking layers of iron-rich rock found around the world, are direct evidence of oxygen interacting with the oceans. Before oxygen could build up in the air, it first had to saturate the seas, binding with dissolved iron to form rust that settled to the ocean floor. This created vast deposits of iron ore, resources that humanity now mines to fuel its own industries. But the way these formations appear is peculiar. The layering suggests pulses of oxygenation, sudden events rather than a uniform process. It's as though someone was running experiments. Introduce oxygen, observe the effect, pause, adjust, try again, over and over, until the atmosphere flipped for good. If it were a natural microbial process, why would it be so stop and start, so experimental in appearance? The record reads less like the work of chance, and more like the iterations of design. Consider also what oxygen enabled. With its rise came the potential for energy-intensive metabolisms, for creatures that could move faster, grow larger, and develop more complex structures. Without oxygen, brains as we know them could never have evolved. Intelligence itself depends on oxygen-rich energy production. In a sense, the Great Oxidation Event was the prerequisite for consciousness. It was the doorway through which intelligence had to pass to exist. If that's the case, then doesn't it seem strange how perfectly timed it was? Too early, and the planet might not have been ready. Too late, and life might have stagnated in simplicity forever. Instead, it happened precisely when it could set the stage for everything that followed, including us. Coincidence, or something else? Skeptics would argue there's no need to invoke intention. Evolution is full of strange leaps, and the oxygen event is simply one of them. But if we frame this within the larger pattern, the metallic spheres, the isotopic anomalies, the fossil record gaps, it becomes harder to dismiss. Each anomaly on its own may be explainable, but together they form a tapestry that hints at design, at interference, at cycles far older than humanity. The Great Oxidation Event may not have been the birth of life as we know it, but it was certainly a rebirth, a dramatic transformation that feels less like chance and more like purpose. And think of what this implies for our own future. Right now, we're altering the atmosphere again, flooding it with carbon dioxide, methane, and synthetic chemicals. We are creating what some geologists already call the Anthropocene, a distinct layer in Earth's history that future beings could detect millions of years from now. To them, it might look exactly like the oxygen event looks to us. A sudden atmospheric change, a radical departure from the baseline, a clear signal that something intelligent was at work. In other words, the Great Oxidation Event might not just be a mystery from the past. It might be a mirror, showing us what the legacy of our own civilization will look like when time has buried us. The haunting part is this. If civilizations rise and fall in cycles, each altering the planet in ways detectable only through chemistry, then maybe the oxygen event was not the first time, and certainly not the last. Maybe it was just one in a series of atmospheric signatures, each marking the rise of a civilization that came, experimented, transformed, and then vanished. We may be standing in the middle of one of those cycles right now, oblivious to how familiar it might look in the distant future. The Great Oxidation Event stands as both a warning and a reminder. It tells us that the atmosphere is not just a passive background, it is an active participant in the story of life, one that can be rewritten suddenly, violently, and perhaps deliberately. And if it was rewritten once before, then who's to say it won't be rewritten again? This section runs Do you want me to keep going straight into section 5? Mysterious isotopes in the same flowing, uninterrupted narrative style? Or would you prefer me to stretch section 4 further with additional deep dives before moving on? You said, start writing section 5. No segmentation, not less than one. ChatGPT said, here's section 5, mysterious isotopes, written as a continuous, flowing narrative with no segmentation, designed to sustain intrigue and run over 1,000 words. One of the most subtle yet most telling pieces of evidence that something may have happened in Earth's deep past lies in isotopes. At first, it doesn't sound exciting, tiny variations in atomic signatures locked inside rock. But when you start to peel back what those signatures reveal, the story becomes extraordinary. Isotopes are like fingerprints left behind after chemical reactions. They can tell us if a spike in carbon came from volcanic activity, from the slow decay of organic matter, or from something altogether different, like the burning of fossil fuels or the detonation of nuclear devices. In this way, isotopes are the silent witnesses of history, incapable of lying. They don't care who was here or what was done. They simply record the truth in numbers and ratios. And some of those numbers don't make sense. Buried in layers millions of years old, scientists have found spikes and anomalies that look eerily similar to the kind of disturbances we're creating today. Carbon levels that rise in ways too abrupt to be explained by natural cycles, traces of isotopes that match the chemical fingerprints of combustion and industry. It's as if the Earth has already experienced its own industrial age once before, long before humans ever appeared. Take carbon isotopes as an example. Normally, the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13 remains relatively stable over time, shifting slowly in response to natural processes like volcanism or weathering. But in certain layers of rock, there are sudden dramatic shifts that mirror what we see today as we pump billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from fossil fuels. These spikes don't last for just a few years. They stretch across thousands of years, suggesting that something massive and sustained was driving them. Volcanoes can cause carbon disturbances, yes, but the isotopic fingerprints they leave behind are different. The anomalies in question look uncannily like the burning of organic carbon, the same thing our factories, cars, and power plants do every day. So what explains them? Were they the result of some natural, unknown process? Or are they the residue of a civilization that rose, industrialized, and burned its way through its own version of fossil fuels, only to vanish, leaving nothing behind but the chemical echo of its existence? The mystery deepens when you look beyond carbon. Other isotopes show patterns that defy easy explanation. Nitrogen isotopes, for instance, sometimes appear in concentrations suggestive of large-scale fertilizer use, something we associate only with modern agriculture. Sulfur isotopes in certain ancient rocks carry signals that look like the byproducts of industrial emissions. And then there are the radioactive isotopes, the most chilling clues of all. Several places, sediments contain unusual ratios of isotopes, like plutonium-244, which does not occur naturally in significant amounts, and has a half-life short enough that any original supply from Earth's formation should have decayed long ago. Yet traces exist. Some scientists argue these come from cosmic sources like supernova dust raining down on Earth. But in some layers, the concentration and distribution of these isotopes resemble the fallout patterns from nuclear detonation. Imagine that the chemical shadow of nuclear activity buried in rock strata millions of years older than our species. If true, it would mean that whoever came before us not only mastered energy, but also weaponized it, leaving behind a scar that even time could not erase. One of the most famous examples of anomalous isotopes comes from the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, about 56 million years ago. During this period, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere spiked, global temperatures rose by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, and ecosystems collapsed in patterns disturbingly familiar to the climate change we're experiencing today. Geologists often explain this with theories of massive methane release from ocean floors or volcanic eruptions, but the isotopic evidence suggests a rapid injection of carbon with a signature almost identical to burning fossil fuel. In other words, it looks like someone lit the planet on fire with industrial activity. If that were natural, it would be one of the strangest coincidences in Earth's history. But if it weren't natural, then the Pétienne might have been the final chapter of an ancient civilization's story, their industrial age recorded only as a chemical anomaly in rocks. The unsettling thing about isotopes is that they don't vanish. Buildings collapse, cities erode, artifacts rust, but isotopes endure. They're locked into sediments, ice cores, and minerals, quietly testifying to events long forgotten. If an advanced civilization burned coal and oil millions of years ago, we wouldn't find their factories today, but we would find their carbon signature, written permanently in the language of isotopes. And that's exactly what we're finding. Spikes, anomalies, fingerprints that don't align with natural baselines. Each one raises the same question: are we reading the traces of our own future in the past? Because if it happened before, then what's happening to us now is not unprecedented. It's a cycle repeating itself. The Oklo phenomenon in Gabon, Africa, adds another strange layer to the story. There, scientists discovered a natural nuclear reactor that operated about 2 billion years ago. The uranium deposits had achieved critical mass, sustained reactions, and left behind isotopic ratios that mirror those in modern nuclear reactors. Officially, it's explained as a natural occurrence, a lucky alignment of geology and chemistry. But what if it wasn't just luck? What if Oklo represents more than just natural fission? The isotopes there tell a story of sustained nuclear reactions that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. It's presented as a natural wonder, but skeptics note the efficiency and longevity of the reactions are remarkably similar to what engineered reactors achieve. If ancient hands were involved, the isotopes at Oklo might not be natural signatures at all, but the remnants of a civilization experimenting with nuclear power long before we thought it possible. And this is the key point. Isotopes don't need to tell us everything. They don't need to reveal blueprints, ruins, or artifacts. They only need to tell us that something happened which should not have happened. When the ratios are wrong, when the fingerprints don't match volcanism, when the carbon shifts resemble combustion instead of natural cycles, the message is clear. The Earth has been through this before. Something or someone once altered the chemistry of the planet in ways that mimic our own alterations today. The evidence is subtle, but it's there, waiting for us to connect the dots. What makes the whole subject even more haunting is how the isotopes tie directly into our own legacy. If humans disappeared tomorrow, future geologists would see the exact same patterns we're finding in the ancient past. They'd see the sudden rise in carbon dioxide, the plastic polymers embedded in sediments, the nitrogen isotopes from fertilizers, the radioactive isotopes from nuclear tests. They would argue over the cause: volcanoes, methane, cosmic dust. But the truth would be obvious if they dared to imagine it. There was a civilization here. The Earth's history would repeat itself as future beings debated the meaning of the anomalies, just as we debate them now. Which forces us to ask, are we simply the latest iteration in a cycle of rise and collapse? Each one recorded in isotopes and anomalies, each one forgotten until the next civilization makes the same mistakes. The rocks don't lie. They hold the memory of everything that has happened, etched in chemistry that can't be erased. The question is not whether the isotopes exist. They do. The question is whether we are brave enough to read them for what they might truly be. Because if we accept the possibility that they point to civilizations before us, then we also have to accept the possibility that our own civilization may end the same way, reduced to nothing more than a mysterious isotopic spike in rock, a chemical whisper of a people who thought they were the first and the last, only to vanish like those before them. When people think of proof of a past civilization, they often imagine ruins, towering structures buried under layers of earth, forgotten cities waiting to be uncovered, or tools preserved in stone. But there's another, perhaps even more compelling, kind of evidence: synthetic materials. Unlike natural minerals or organic remains, synthetic substances don't emerge on their own. They require design, intention, and manipulation. They are the fingerprints of intelligence, and astonishingly, some sediments and rock layers on Earth contain things that look a lot like synthetic compounds, polymers, and even plastics, millions of years before humans supposedly created them. If true, these traces would be the most direct evidence yet that we may not be the first species to industrialize this planet. Plastics, for instance, are some of the most durable materials humanity has ever produced. Though we call them disposable, the truth is they're nearly indestructible on human timescales. A plastic bottle tossed into the ocean today will still be recognizable hundreds, perhaps thousands of years from now. Even when they break down, they fragment into microscopic particles, microplastics, which embed themselves into sediments, soil, and even biological tissues. Future geologists, millions of years from now, will almost certainly discover our era marked by a distinctive plastic layer, a stratum filled with synthetic polymers that could never have arisen naturally. But here's where it gets strange. Researchers examining ancient sediments have found structures and materials that behave just like plastics, even though they're supposedly older than humanity by tens of millions of years. These materials don't correspond to any known natural process. They resemble polymers, long chains of molecules that require advanced chemistry to create. And some are stronger, more resistant, even more advanced than the plastics we've managed to produce. Imagine what that means. If synthetic polymers exist in rocks that predate us, then the simplest explanation is that someone else made them. Another civilization, long forgotten, left behind its most durable artifacts, buried and preserved by time. Cities collapse, metals corrode, but plastics endure. They are time capsules of a civilization's existence, whether that civilization intends it or not. Just as our own future legacy will be a world littered with microplastics embedded into every ecosystem, perhaps the ancient past holds similar reminders, overlooked because we assume they shouldn't be there. The most compelling reports come from deep drilling projects and marine sediment cores, where researchers stumbled across polymer-like materials under layers dated to epochs before humans. The official explanations tend to focus on unusual mineral processes, natural resins hardened into odd forms, volcanic activity creating glassy structures, or rare hydrocarbons fossilizing in unusual ways. But those explanations are just that, attempts to fit something unsettling into the framework of natural history. Because if they admitted these were synthetic, the entire story of Earth would have to be rewritten. To accept that would be to accept that intelligence existed before us, an intelligence capable of industrial chemistry, mass production, and perhaps global distribution. Then there's the issue of durability. Some of the anomalous materials discovered in older strata appear to be more resistant to degradation than our own plastics. Tests on their molecular structure suggest bonds stronger than what we produce today. If that's true, then the civilization that created them was ahead of us in material science. They engineered substances meant to last, substances that could outlive not only themselves but also the geological cycles of Earth. Which raises a chilling question: were they trying to leave a record? Did they know they would vanish, and so create materials that could persist as markers of their existence? If so, those markers are here, buried beneath our feet, whispering the same message again and again: we were here too. Plastics aren't the only suspects. Certain forms of synthetic glass have been reported in geological formations that date back millions of years. Some of these glassy structures resemble what's left behind after extreme heat events, like nuclear detonations or advanced smelting processes. Trinitite, the greenish glass formed in the desert after the first atomic bomb test in New Mexico, is one modern example. It's unique, unmistakable, and impossible to confuse with naturally formed glass. Yet in ancient strata there are glassy substances with nearly identical characteristics. Officially, these are dismissed as the result of meteor impacts or volcanic lightning strikes, both of which can fuse sand into glass. But in some cases, the chemical signatures don't match those processes. Instead, they look engineered, evidence of controlled industrial-scale reactions rather than random cosmic or geological events. Again, the simplest explanation would be technology. Someone at some time learned how to manipulate matter on a scale far beyond what nature does casually. Even metals enter the conversation. Occasionally, metallic alloys have been discovered in ancient deposits, combinations of elements that don't occur together naturally and that require smelting or industrial processes to produce. These are usually ignored or labeled contamination, but contamination is an easy word to hide behind. If an object defies explanation, it's more comfortable to assume a modern intrusion than to ask the harder question: what if it belongs exactly where it was found? What if an ancient civilization left behind its alloys, just as we leave behind aluminum, steel and titanium. Over millions of years, most of these materials would corrode away, but in protected pockets, sealed sediments, ocean floors or mineral-rich caves, they might persist long enough for us to stumble across them and feel that cold shiver of impossibility. Think about how this connects to our own future. If humanity disappears tomorrow, what will remain? Not our books or our digital files, not our wooden structures or our fragile electronics. What will remain is our waste, plastics, polymers, glass, and alloys, all embedded into the geological record. These will become the markers of our existence, the undeniable proof that we were here. And if we know that about ourselves, then it only makes sense to look at similar markers in the past and ask, who left these behind? Because they shouldn't be there if we are truly the first. Their presence demands a story, and the story they suggest is older, stranger, and more unsettling than the one we've been told. The silence of mainstream science on these anomalies speaks volumes. Researchers who stumble upon synthetic-like materials in ancient contexts are often quick to file them away under natural oddities. After all, to suggest otherwise is to invite ridicule, to be cast as a fantasist or conspiracy theorist. But silence doesn't erase the evidence. The materials are real, the anomalies are measurable, and the questions linger. Just as the Alvarez discovery of iridium forced us to accept the asteroid impact theory, perhaps one day enough evidence of ancient synthetics will pile up to force us to admit what seems unthinkable now, that we share this planet not just with the memories of animals long extinct, but with the shadows of civilizations erased from history. And that, ultimately, is what makes synthetic materials so powerful as evidence. They don't ask us to believe in myths or legends. They don't require us to interpret vague carvings or ancient stories. They are tangible, chemical, undeniable. They are the closest thing to a voice that the ancient world could send forward to us, saying, "You are not the first, and you will not be the last. Your plastics will be our plastics, your isotopes will be our isotopes, and when you are gone, the Earth will bury you as it buried us. And millions of years from now, when another species digs into the strata, they will find your polymers and ask the same question you are asking now: who came before?" If there is any single type of evidence that sends shivers down the spine, it is the possibility of nuclear activity in Earth's deep past. Unlike stone tools or bones, which can always be dismissed as natural shapes or misinterpretations, nuclear signatures are harder to wave away. They are mathematical, chemical, unmistakable. The isotopes produced by nuclear reactions simply do not occur naturally in those proportions, at least not in the ways we understand Earth's processes, which is why the discovery of the Oklo phenomenon in Gabon, Africa, remains one of the most unsettling scientific revelations of the last century. There, in a uranium deposit, scientists discovered the remains of what can only be described as nuclear reactors. Yes, reactors that operated nearly 2 billion years ago. The uranium ore showed depletion levels that matched what you would expect if sustained nuclear fission had taken place. And the byproducts of that reaction, isotopes of elements like neodymium and ruthenium, matched the same kinds of waste products we produce in modern nuclear power plants. To this day, the official explanation is that Oklo was a natural reactor, the result of an extraordinarily rare combination of geology and chemistry that allowed the uranium to reach criticality without human intervention. But when you look closer, that explanation feels a little too convenient. Because for Oklo to happen naturally, everything had to align in near-perfect condition. The uranium had to be unusually rich in fissile isotope U-235, groundwater had to act as a moderator, and the reaction had to be self-regulating over hundreds of thousands of years. That's a lot of coincidences for something that looks suspiciously engineered. The natural reactor explanation satisfies many because it preserves our sense of uniqueness. But the fact remains that the Oklo site produced nuclear reactions that rival those created in modern facilities. It operated in pulses, turning on and off in cycles that suggest not chaos, but regulation. How do you get a natural process to regulate itself so precisely? And why do the isotopic ratios there look so much like what we see from man-made reactors? If it truly was natural, it would be one of the most extraordinary natural accidents in the history of the planet. And yet, if it was not natural, then it implies something far more disturbing, that a civilization billions of years ago not only mastered nuclear technology, but used it on a scale large enough to alter the geology of an entire region. The story doesn't end in Gabon. Across the world, Traces of isotopes have been found in contexts where they don't belong. Some sediments, for instance, contain anomalous levels of radioactive isotopes, like cesium-37 and plutonium. Officially, these are explained as contamination from modern nuclear activity or cosmic events. But in certain cases, the distribution of these isotopes resembles fallout patterns, clusters in specific layers, rather than random dispersal. Fallout is distinctive. It rains down in gradients, with heavier particles falling closer to the detonation site and lighter ones spreading farther afield. And that's exactly the kind of pattern some of these anomalies show. If they were cosmic in origin, we'd expect a more uniform global distribution. If they were volcanic, the isotopes wouldn't match nuclear signatures. The resemblance to weapons testing is uncanny, and it raises the terrifying possibility that nuclear war has already scarred this planet once before. There are ancient myths that speak of great fire from the sky, of cities turned to ash, of weapons so powerful they blotted out the sun. In India's Mahabharata, descriptions of a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe and an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 1,000 suns read eerily like accounts of nuclear detonations. Skeptics dismiss these as poetic exaggerations or symbolic stories. But when those stories align with geological evidence of isotopic anomalies, you have to wonder if they are memories distorted and mythologized of real events in a distant past. Could there have been civilizations that fought wars with weapons of mass destruction, their battles so cataclysmic that their traces remain detectable today? If so, then we are not unique. We are simply walking a path already walked before, repeating mistakes already made, following a cycle already written. One of the strongest arguments against the idea of ancient nuclear technology is that no physical remains of reactors or weapons have been found. No machinery, no cores, no warheads. But again, think about how time works. Our own nuclear reactors, if abandoned today, would not last millions of years. Their structures would corrode, collapse, and be swallowed by geological processes. Even the most durable materials would not survive intact. The only thing that would remain are the isotopes, the chemical scars of reactions that once took place. And those are exactly what we see, scars etched into the Earth itself, stubbornly resisting time's attempt to erase them. In fact, this might be the only way ancient nuclear activity could ever be detected, not through ruins or artifacts, but through the isotope record, the one thing time cannot disguise. What makes this line of thought even more compelling is how eerily it mirrors our own trajectory. We have nuclear power plants scattered across the globe, leaving behind their isotopic footprints. We have detonated nuclear weapons in tests that will leave a detectable layer in the Earth's strata for millions of years. If humanity vanished tomorrow, the geologic record would one day show unusual concentrations of isotopes, strange layers of fallout patterns, and depleted uranium deposits. A future civilization would look at those anomalies and debate their origin. Were they natural, cosmic, or signs of something more? They would argue just as we argue now. The only difference is that we know exactly what those isotopes mean, because we are the ones producing them, which suggests something chilling. Perhaps we are simply recognizing in the ancient record the same patterns we are creating ourselves. The Oklo reactors are the smoking gun that refuses to be ignored. Even if they were natural, they demonstrate that nuclear fission on Earth is not an impossibility of nature, but the precision, the cycles, the isotopic signatures, they all leave enough room for doubt to unsettle even the most confident skeptic. And when you place that evidence alongside stories of fire from the sky, along with the fallout-like isotope patterns scattered in ancient layers, the picture begins to look disturbingly familiar. Perhaps we are not looking at coincidences at all. Perhaps we are looking at history repeating itself, a warning encoded in the rocks. Civilizations rise, discover the atom, unleash its power, and eventually fall, leaving behind only isotopic scars to whisper their story to the future. And if that's true, then we must confront a question far more unsettling than whether ancient civilizations existed. The real question is whether we are destined to share their fate. Because if nuclear activity truly happened in the past, if entire societies once burned themselves out with the same technology we now wield, then history is not a line of progress but a cycle of self-destruction. We might not be on the verge of a breakthrough into the stars. We might be teetering on the edge of repeating a catastrophe that has already happened, maybe more than once. The isotopes don't lie. They tell us that someone somewhere long before us played with fire on a planetary scale, and the silence that followed is a silence we should be very careful not to repeat. When we talk about extinction events, the usual narrative frames them as natural disasters, asteroid strikes, volcanic eruptions, shifts in climate, or sudden changes in ocean chemistry. And certainly, many extinctions can be explained that way, but not all of them. Some of the most devastating die-offs in Earth's history look strangely precise, almost targeted, as though someone pressed a reset button with astonishing accuracy. They don't just wipe out random species, they remove dominant groups entirely, clearing the stage for new life forms to take over, as though life were being pruned and reshaped by some unseen gardener. And when you look closely, it becomes difficult to shake the idea that at least some of these extinctions don't just look natural, they look engineered. The Great Dying at the end of the Permian period, roughly 252 million years ago, is one of the most chilling examples. It was the largest extinction in Earth's history, eliminating about 96% of marine species and 70% of land species. The fossil record tells us the world went from lush and teeming to barren and nearly lifeless in the span of a geological instant. Entire ecosystems collapsed, food chains unraveled, and life itself teetered on the brink of annihilation. Scientists usually blame massive volcanic activity in Siberia, which released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, triggering runaway climate change, ocean acidification, and anoxia. But the closer you examine the evidence, the more questions emerge. The extinction seems selective, wiping out certain groups more thoroughly than others. Some species survived almost untouched, as though shielded from the worst effects. And in the layers of rock that mark this catastrophe, there are chemical signatures, spikes in isotopes, traces of compounds that don't perfectly match volcanic output. Some look oddly like industrial byproducts, as though the collapse was driven not just by nature, but by technology. The same unsettling pattern shows up in other extinctions. At the end of the Cretaceous period, when the dinosaurs vanished, the asteroid impact in Chicxulub, Mexico is the standard explanation. And it fits the evidence. The global iridium layer, the shocked quartz, the crater itself. But even here, anomalies creep in. Some regions show signs of extreme fires and atmospheric toxins, inconsistent with an asteroid alone. Certain isotopes resemble those produced by intense nuclear reactions, almost as if the impact wasn't the only thing at play. What if the asteroid was only part of the story? What if it was a trigger, or even a weapon used to reset life on Earth and clear the way for mammals and eventually humans to rise? Even the smaller extinction events, ones less famous than the Permian or Cretaceous, hint at strange precision. In some cases, entire classes of organisms vanish while others remain almost untouched. Why would a natural disaster discriminate so effectively? Climate shifts, for instance, should affect all species broadly, yet the fossil record shows patterns of surgical elimination. It's as though someone had a plan, deciding which species to erase and which to preserve. If that were the case, then the extinctions of the past might not be accidents at all, but interventions, deliberate resets designed to shape the course of evolution. And then there are the toxins. In several extinction layers, chemical residues have been found that resemble compounds used in modern industry. Heavy metals, halogenated compounds, and other substances that do not fit cleanly into natural geological processes. Some can be explained as volcanic byproducts, but in other cases, the concentrations and distributions are suspicious. They look less like random dispersal and more like targeted contamination. Imagine a civilization experimenting with bioweapons or industrial chemicals, only to unleash toxins so pervasive that they poisoned entire ecosystems. The fossil record wouldn't show factories or weapons. It would only show the sudden disappearance of species paired with chemical anomalies in the rocks. And that is exactly what we find. The eerie thing about these engineered-looking extinctions is how much they resemble our own trajectory. Right now, humanity is driving what many scientists call the sixth mass extinction. Species are vanishing at a rate 100 times faster than the natural background rate. Forests are collapsing, oceans are acidifying, and entire ecosystems are unraveling. And it's not random. We're not just destroying life indiscriminately. We're targeting habitats through deforestation. We're eliminating keystone species through hunting and pollution. And we're reshaping the biosphere to suit ourselves. Future geologists, millions of years from now, might look back and see the Holocene extinction as yet another sudden selective reset in Earth's history. They might never know it was us, just as we may never truly know who or what was behind the extinctions of the past, but the patterns line up disturbingly well, suggesting a cycle of civilizations rising, destabilizing their environment, and collapsing, each leaving behind a wave of extinction that looks engineered from a distance. Some researchers have even proposed that extinctions might be part of a self-correcting system. If civilizations become too advanced and disruptive, they trigger feedback loops, whether natural, technological, or both, that wipe them out, resetting the biosphere. This could explain why extinctions are so frequent, why they come with such devastating precision, and why life always seems to rebound in a new direction afterward. It's almost as if the planet itself has mechanisms for pruning back civilizations that grow too destructive. Whether those mechanisms are natural or the legacy of ancient engineering is an open question, but the result is the same. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and the biosphere resets. What makes this idea especially haunting is how extinction events line up with bursts of evolutionary innovation. After the Permian extinction, new groups like the dinosaurs rose. After the Cretaceous extinction, mammals flourished. After each collapse, there's a burst of creativity, as if the slate was cleared intentionally to allow new experiments. Naturalists argue that this is simply evolution responding to opportunity, filling empty niches. But another interpretation is possible. What if the extinctions were the opportunity? What if someone or something was guiding evolution by wiping the board clean and letting new life rise? That would mean the history of life isn't random at all, but shaped by deliberate resets across deep time. The silence of these events is deafening. Fossils don't tell us why species vanished. Rocks don't explain whether toxins were natural or synthetic, but the patterns are there: sudden die-offs, selective eliminations, chemical residues that don't belong. Together they whisper of interventions we are only beginning to recognize. Perhaps Earth has always been a kind of laboratory, with civilizations testing, failing, and resetting. Each extinction a consequence of hubris or a deliberate act to steer the planet in a new direction. If that's true, then we're not looking at natural history at all. We're looking at cycles of rise and collapse, each one marked by engineered extinctions that leave behind only questions for the next inhabitants. And here is the most chilling thought of all. If extinctions have been engineered in the past, then what about the one we are living through now? Is it simply our own doing, the inevitable outcome of our destruction of the biosphere? Or is it part of a larger cycle, something bigger than us, something we can't yet see? Are we the architects of our own demise, or are we being pruned like the species before us, part of a cycle that ensures no civilization lasts forever? The rocks don't give answers, only evidence, and the evidence suggests that extinction, whether natural or engineered, is the rule, not the exception. We may already be living through the next chapter in a story that has been written many times before. At the bottom of the world lies a continent we barely understand. Antarctica is a land of extremes, endless ice, howling winds, and months of impenetrable darkness. To most, it seems like the least likely place on Earth to hold secrets of ancient civilizations. And yet, as the ice sheets retreat and modern scanning technologies probe beneath their frozen surface, the story of Antarctica has begun to change. Far from being an untouched wasteland, it is emerging as one of the most mysterious regions on the planet, a place where the lines between natural geology and potential artificial structures blur in unsettling ways. For decades, explorers and scientists have reported anomalies that defy easy explanation. Radar images suggesting vast geometric formations buried under miles of ice, sonar scans revealing patterns too symmetrical to be natural, and even hints of biological life adapted in ways that raise questions about whether something once thrived there long before the human timeline began. The first layer of mystery comes from geology itself. Beneath Antarctica's ice is a continent the size of the United States and Mexico combined, with mountains taller than the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and lakes sealed beneath the ice for millions of years. Lake Vostok, for instance, has been cut off from the surface for at least 15 million years, preserved in isolation like a time capsule. When scientists drilled into it, they found microbial life that seemed not only resilient, but strangely adapted to its extreme, pressurized environment. Genetic analysis revealed sequences unlike anything found elsewhere on Earth, sparking whispers that perhaps these organisms had been engineered or had evolved under guidance rather than by chance. After all, why would life flourish in a place sealed off for so long under conditions so hostile? Was it simply evolution's ingenuity, or was it the relic of a deeper experiment? A reminder that even in Antarctica's frozen silence, intelligence may have left its mark. But the real intrigue comes from what radar and satellite imagery have revealed. Beneath the ice sheets, some scans show rectangular formations, long straight lines, and structures that appear too regular to be natural. In one region, researchers identified what looked like massive pyramidal shapes, rising from the ice as though an ancient civilization had built them before they were swallowed by glaciers. Mainstream scientists argue these are simply nunataks, mountain peaks that protrude through the ice. But the symmetry, the angles, and the way they align with cardinal directions have fueled speculation for years. Are these truly mountains? Or are they ruins entombed in ice? Relics of a civilization so old that its memory has been erased. If cities or structures once stood there, Antarctica would have been a very different place, a lush temperate land as it was tens of millions of years ago, when forests and rivers covered the continent. And that's exactly what paleoclimate data tells us. Antarctica wasn't always frozen. It was once warm, green, and capable of supporting life on a grand scale. So the question isn't whether life could have thrived there. The question is whether it already did, and whether it left behind clues now locked beneath 2 miles of ice. Stories from explorers add another unsettling layer. In the mid-20th century, reports surfaced of strange magnetic anomalies detected by expeditions in Antarctica. Compasses spun wildly, instruments malfunctioned, and some areas seemed to defy normal geophysical explanations. Some claimed that massive metallic objects were buried beneath the ice, throwing off readings. Others whispered about underground caverns heated by geothermal energy, large enough to house entire cities. While many of these stories drift into the realm of conspiracy, the fact remains that Antarctica is geologically active. Volcanic systems beneath the ice generate heat, creating vast subglacial lakes and cavities. If a civilization wanted to hide or survive through cataclysmic changes on the surface, these subterranean havens would have been ideal. What if the anomalies aren't just natural heat sources, but remnants of deliberate engineering, ancient shelters still humming faintly beneath the ice? Adding to the puzzle are biological anomalies. Samples taken from ice cores and subglacial lakes have revealed organisms that defy categorization. Some possess genetic traits that suggest artificial manipulation, adaptations far too precise to have arisen randomly. Certain microbes metabolize in ways that mirror bioengineered organisms we create in labs today, optimized for extreme efficiency under harsh conditions. To most, these are curiosities, but in the broader pattern they hint at something larger. Perhaps Antarctica was once a center of experimentation, a testing ground for manipulating life to survive in cold, extreme environments. If so, the engineered life forms we're finding today are the echoes of those experiments, surviving against impossible odds as the only testimony of what once was. And then there are the whispers about signals. Radio operators and satellites have occasionally picked up bursts of energy from beneath the ice, transient signals that don't match natural geophysical phenomena. Some say they are glitches or the product of scientific equipment. Others suggest they could be remnants of ancient technology, still transmitting after unimaginable spans of time. After all, if a civilization once existed there, why wouldn't it have developed communication systems, monitoring devices, or power sources? Our own technologies, buried under ice, would continue to emit for years or decades. Advanced systems, perhaps powered by nuclear or geothermal energy, might endure far longer. Could the faint whispers of Antarctica be the dying breaths of a machine designed to outlast its makers? Skeptics, of course, insist that all of this can be explained by geology and coincidence. Pyramids are mountains, signals are noise, microbes are just hardy survivors, but skepticism cannot erase the patterns. It cannot erase the fact that Antarctica was once a lush, habitable land. It cannot erase the geometric anomalies revealed by scans. And it cannot erase the biological strangeness locked in ice that has not seen the sun in millions of years. Taken together, these fragments form a story that is hard to dismiss. Antarctica may not be just an empty wilderness. It may be a graveyard of civilizations, or worse, a vault where their remnants still lie hidden, waiting for us to uncover them. If that's the case, then the ice isn't just a barrier, it's a protector, a cloak hiding something the world is not ready to see. Perhaps that's why Antarctica remains one of the most restricted places on Earth, governed by international treaties, its interior off-limits to ordinary explorers. Officially, this is to preserve the environment and maintain peace. But unofficially, some argue it's because what lies beneath the ice could shatter our understanding of history. If ruins or technologies are found there, they would confirm what many already suspect, that humans are not the first, and that the Earth's story is far more complex than textbooks admit. The silence surrounding Antarctica may not be ignorance, but deliberate secrecy designed to keep these secrets frozen until the world is ready, or until they can no longer be hidden. The haunting part is that the ice is melting. Climate change is stripping Antarctica's cloak faster than ever before. As glaciers retreat and ice shelves collapse, what lies beneath is beginning to emerge. Will we find nothing but bare rock and ancient forests, or will we uncover structures, artifacts, or technologies that should not exist? The answer may come sooner than we think, and when it does, it may not just rewrite history. It may remind us that the cycle of civilizations is real, and that the ghosts of the past have been hiding at the bottom of the world all along. Climate is the great master of life on Earth. It dictates who thrives, who struggles, and who disappears. Every civilization, from the earliest agricultural villages to the sprawling empires of today, has been bound to the climate's mercy. When the rains come, societies flourish. When drought strikes or ice creeps southward, civilizations collapse. Yet hidden within the Earth's deep history are clues that climate shifts may not always have been entirely natural. Some appear too sudden, too precise, and too aligned with evolutionary or civilizational turning points. These anomalies raise a possibility both thrilling and unsettling. What if Earth's climate has been controlled or at least manipulated before? What if civilizations in the distant past possessed the knowledge to alter weather, adjust temperatures, or even reset entire atmospheric systems? If so, the story of our planet is not just one of survival under nature's whims, but of repeated experiments in planetary climate control, each one leaving behind traces for us to puzzle over today. To understand why this matters, look first at the strange regularity of Earth's climatic shifts. Ice ages come and go in cycles, punctuated by sudden warming periods known as interglacials. While Milankovitch cycles, small variations in Earth's orbit and tilt, can explain much of this, they don't always account for how abrupt the changes can be. In some cases, global temperatures spike several degrees in just a few centuries, far too quickly for orbital mechanics alone. Take the Younger Dryas, a mysterious cold snap that struck about 12,800 years ago. After the Ice Age seemed to be ending, with temperatures rising and glaciers retreating, the climate suddenly reversed. Within decades, ice returned, ecosystems collapsed, and human societies that had begun to settle into agriculture were thrown back into survival mode. Then, just as abruptly, the Younger Dryas ended, and the Earth warmed again. Official explanations focus on meltwater flooding into oceans and disrupting currents, but the swiftness and precision of the shifts resemble not an accident, but an adjustment, as though a thermostat had been dialed down and then reset. Could this have been the result of natural chaos? Or was it the residue of a civilization experimenting with or deliberately controlling the climate on a planetary scale? Evidence for ancient climate manipulation doesn't just come from sudden shifts. It also emerges in the form of unexplained chemical layers in ice cores and sediments. In Greenland and Antarctica, for instance, researchers have identified abrupt rises in greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane, that appear without clear natural triggers. In some cases, these spikes look remarkably similar to what we're producing today through fossil fuel burning. Natural explanations exist, such as volcanic eruptions or methane release from permafrost. Yet some of these layers lack corresponding evidence of eruptions or geological upheaval. Instead, they stand alone, anomalous and unsettling, like fingerprints left by an industrial process long vanished. If a past civilization experimented with atmospheric engineering, burning fuels, releasing chemicals, or even intentionally raising greenhouse gases to prevent an ice age, this is exactly what we would expect to see. Sudden chemical shifts written into the ice. But chemical fingerprints are not the only clues. Geological records show regions that should have been deserts suddenly blooming with life, while fertile areas inexplicably collapsed into drought. These patterns suggest localized climate control, the kind of intervention that might come from weather modification technologies. Today, humanity is beginning to toy with similar ideas. Cloud seeding to produce rain, injecting aerosols into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight, or building massive mirrors in orbit to regulate planetary temperature. If we are already thinking about such methods, why should it be unthinkable that a prior civilization, perhaps millions of years ago, might have done the same? Their tools would not survive intact over such timescales, but the effects might altered rainfall patterns, sudden greening of deserts, or the collapse of once stable monsoon systems could all be the echoes of ancient geoengineering projects. Then there are the myths, those fragments of human memory that often preserve truths beneath their poetry. Cultures across the world tell stories of gods who controlled the weather, who called down floods, who banished drought, or who darkened the sky to punish humanity. These are usually interpreted as metaphors for natural disasters. But what if they are garbled memories of real interventions? A civilization capable of altering the climate would appear godlike to those who came after. Their ability to summon storms, redirect rivers, or cool the planet would blur the line between technology and divinity. The myths of great floods, scorching suns, or sudden winters might not be allegories at all, but distorted records of climate control on a scale we can barely imagine. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that climate control was not always about survival. It may have been about power. Imagine a civilization that could weaponize the weather, directing droughts against its enemies, freezing rival regions into submission, or causing crops to fail through targeted manipulation. Our own militaries have already explored these ideas, researching whether weather modification could serve as a tool of war. If we in just a few centuries of industrialization have considered this, then a more advanced civilization with deeper knowledge of planetary systems might have perfected it. And if they did, the traces might appear as sudden localized extinctions, agricultural collapses, or regional climate anomalies, patterns we can still detect in the fossil and sedimentary record. What makes all of this especially haunting is how directly it mirrors our present. We are, right now, contemplating planetary climate control under the banner of geoengineering. Confronted with the looming disaster of global warming, scientists propose injecting sulfur aerosols into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight, fertilizing oceans to absorb carbon, or even placing giant shades in orbit. Each of these methods carries risks we barely understand. A miscalculation could plunge Earth into drought, famine, or even a new ice age. And yet the urgency of our crisis pushes us toward these options. If civilizations before us faced similar crises and the isotopic evidence suggests they did, perhaps they too attempted climate control. Perhaps their interventions worked for a time, only to spiral out of control, triggering the very extinctions we now study as natural disasters. The cycle would be cruelly ironic. Civilizations rise, push their planet to the brink, attempt geoengineering to save themselves, and in doing so hasten their downfall. The silence of the record doesn't negate this, it reinforces it. If a civilization's greatest legacy was its attempt to control climate, we wouldn't find their machines or blueprints millions of years later. We would find exactly what we do find: sudden climatic shifts, inexplicable chemical anomalies, and extinction events that arrive with surgical precision. We would be left with the suspicion that nature was not entirely in charge, that intelligence had once placed its hands on the planetary thermostat and twisted the dial. And that suspicion grows stronger as we compare the past to our present, because the patterns match too closely to dismiss as coincidence. In the end, the question is not whether climate control has been attempted before, it is whether we will repeat the same mistake. If the Younger Dryas was the result of geoengineering gone wrong, or if ancient civilizations raised greenhouse gases to stave off ice, then their failure is written in our climate record. They disappeared, leaving us to wonder at the anomalies. Now we stand at the same crossroads, poised to make the same choices with the same desperation. Will we succeed where they failed, or will we too vanish? Our only legacy, a thin layer in the ice, a chemical fingerprint that whispers to future beings. They tried to control the sky, and it destroyed them. Fossils are supposed to tell a story of slow, steady evolution, a record of life gradually unfolding across millions of years. From trilobites in Cambrian seas to dinosaurs ruling the Mesozoic, to mammals rising after their fall. The fossil record is the bedrock of our understanding of Earth's history. But scattered throughout this narrative are anomalies, fossils that don't fit, discoveries that suggest something profoundly out of place. These are the misfits of paleontology, the pieces that don't belong in the puzzle we've been taught. They are bones, imprints, and even entire structures that point toward a possibility so radical that most researchers avoid it altogether. The idea that intelligent life, perhaps even civilizations, may have left their traces in eras long before humans appeared. If true, these fossils are not simply oddities, they are messages, fragments of a hidden history buried under layers of time. One of the earliest and most unsettling anomalies is the so-called fossil shoe print, discovered in Nevada in the early 20th century. Embedded in Triassic limestone more than 200 million years old, the imprint appears to show the outline of a human-like shoe sole, complete with what looks like a heel. Mainstream explanations dismiss it as a natural formation that happens to resemble a shoe, but the precision of the shape, the defined edges and the proportions raise an eyebrow. How could something so distinctly artificial appear in rock laid down when dinosaurs had only just begun to dominate? If it is what it looks like, then it suggests beings with technology walked the Earth long before our species evolved. Another anomaly comes from the 19th century, where miners uncovered what looked like a fossilized chain embedded in coal. The coal itself dated back some 300 million years, a time when the only life on land was primitive plants and insects. A chain, however, implies manufacturing. Critics argue that the artifact was likely intrusive, somehow mixed in with the coal after mining. But those who saw it insisted it was embedded too deeply to have been placed there accidentally. If true, then it means metalworking existed in a world where no civilization was supposed to exist. A fossilized reminder of industry long before humans. Then there are the footprints. In places like Texas, fossilized human-like tracks have been reported alongside those of dinosaurs. The most famous of these are the Paluxy River tracks. Some show dinosaur prints interspersed with what appear to be barefoot human tracks, as though people and dinosaurs walked the same mudflats. Mainstream paleontology has dismissed most of these as hoaxes or misidentified dinosaur prints, eroded to resemble human feet. Yet some researchers point out that certain tracks show arch impressions, heel strikes, and toe shapes that are difficult to attribute to anything but human-like beings. If authentic, these tracks would rewrite history completely, proving that intelligent bipeds existed tens of millions of years before we are told they could have. Skeletal anomalies also haunt the fossil record. The so-called mineralized giant bones discovered in parts of South Africa and Asia depict beings far larger than any hominid we know. Some femurs measure nearly double the size of modern human equivalents, suggesting creatures that could have stood 12 to 15 feet tall. Officially, these finds are either dismissed as misidentified animal bones or ignored altogether. But the sheer scale of some specimens defies easy explanation. Were they from a species of human-like giants that flourished and vanished before us? Or were they the engineered creations of a civilization experimenting with biology on a scale we can scarcely imagine? Even more bizarre are fossils of advanced-looking tools embedded in ancient strata. Reports have surfaced of hammerheads, metallic spheres, and machined-looking objects found in rock layers hundreds of millions of years old. The famous London hammer, for instance, discovered in Texas, appears to be a modern-looking hammer encased in Cretaceous rock, while skeptics argue it may be a more recent hammer encased in a concretion of minerals. Those who studied it insist the surrounding rock genuinely dates back millions of years. If that's true, then who forged the hammer, and what were they building in a world ruled by dinosaurs? Fossilized insects and shells also tell strange stories. In certain Cambrian deposits, for example, trilobites show signs of injuries that look mechanical, as if something with gears or blades sliced through their shells. Some shells display symmetrical drilling holes too precise for random predators. Modern researchers attribute them to ancient worms or other natural causes, but the consistency of the shapes, almost identical to modern drilling equipment, fuels speculation. Could these be traces of technology in use 500 million years ago when our textbooks insist only simple marine life existed? Perhaps the most haunting fossils of all are not bones or tools, but carvings and engravings. In parts of South America and India, stones dating back to prehistoric contexts have been found with what appear to be etched figures, animals, humans, even machines. The Ica stones of Peru, controversial and often accused of being hoaxes, depict humans interacting with dinosaurs, performing surgeries, and using telescopes. Even if many were forged in modern times, the question remains, why would anyone create such specific images unless inspired by something older? If even a fraction of these stones are authentic, they suggest that knowledge of advanced practices existed long before recorded history. What ties all these anomalies together is not just their strangeness, but the consistency of their implications. Over and over again, fossils and artifacts suggest that intelligent beings, humanoid or otherwise, may have walked this planet in deep time. Their traces are scattered, fragmented, and often dismissed, but they persist, and perhaps that's the point. Fossils are, by their nature, incomplete. The record of life is always a tiny fraction of what once existed. For every bone we find, countless others have crumbled to dust. If a civilization existed millions of years ago, we should not expect intact cities or machines. We should expect exactly what we see: rare, tantalizing anomalies that survive by chance, embedded in the record as whispers of something far greater. And isn't that exactly what future beings would find of us, millions of years from now? If humanity vanished tomorrow, most of our works would erode away. Skyscrapers would collapse, highways would be swallowed by forests, and only fragments would endure. A hammer, a shoe print, a skeleton out of place. That is what would survive of us, just as those same fragments are all that survive of whoever came before. The fossil record we rely on as a story of life may be more like a palimpsest, overwritten again and again by cycles of rise and collapse. The mainstream will continue to deny these anomalies because to accept them would be to admit that our story is not unique. But denial cannot erase the evidence. Fossils that don't belong are real, scattered across the world, defying easy classification. Whether they are dismissed as mistakes, labeled as curiosities, or locked away in collections, they remain. And they whisper the same message as isotopes, synthetic materials, and engineered extinctions. Someone was here before us. They left their mark, not in monuments or books, but in the bones of giants, the prints in stone, and the tools encased in ancient rock. The fossil record may not be a record of only life. It may be a record of civilizations forgotten, their story erased, their existence reduced to the handful of anomalies we dare to call out of place. And if we listen closely to those fossils, if we stop dismissing them as errors, we might hear the truth that we are not the first. We are only the latest, walking across the same ground, leaving behind the same fragile traces that someday will look just as impossible to those who come after us. The most haunting question in all of this is not whether ancient civilizations may have existed, but why they disappeared. Evidence scattered across geology, fossils, and myths suggests that intelligence may have risen long before us. Yet none of those civilizations endure. Their ruins are gone, their voices silenced, their stories erased. We are left only with whispers, anomalies, isotopes, artifacts that don't fit. But the bigger mystery is why they vanish completely. How can a civilization capable of nuclear power, advanced materials, or even planetary climate control collapse so utterly that almost nothing remains? The answer may lie not in one simple explanation, but in the recurring cycles of rise and fall that Earth seems destined to repeat. Vanishing is not an accident. It is the inevitable outcome of a dangerous pattern, a loop of hubris, technology, and self-destruction that may have claimed more civilizations than we dare to imagine. One possible reason for these disappearances is self-inflicted collapse. Civilizations expand, innovate, and exploit their environment until they reach a breaking point. Resources dwindle, ecosystems collapse, and society destabilizes. Our own trajectory shows how fragile such a balance is. Forests fall, oceans warm, and species vanish at our hands. If another civilization did the same millions of years ago, they might have burned through their planet's wealth, poisoned their biosphere, and left nothing but chemical scars in the rocks. Their monuments would crumble, their machines corrode, and only their mistakes, extinctions, isotopic spikes, synthetic residues would endure. It is chilling to realize that our own ruins would vanish just as quickly. In a few million years, the concrete and steel of our cities will be gone. The only trace of us will be the same kinds of anomalies we now puzzle over from the past. But collapse is not always gradual. Some vanishings appear sudden, as if civilizations were erased in an instant. Nuclear war is one terrifying possibility. If a society armed itself with weapons of unimaginable power, it might have destroyed itself in a matter of days. The fallout would leave signatures we can still detect, but the cities, the people, and the knowledge would vanish instantly. Perhaps that is why we find evidence of strange isotopes and glassy residues in ancient strata, but no ruins to match them. The civilizations may have incinerated themselves, leaving behind only chemical shadows of their existence. Another explanation could be cosmic catastrophe. Earth has always been vulnerable to the heavens. Asteroid impacts, solar flares and gamma-ray bursts. The Chicxulub impact wiped out the dinosaurs in a geological blink. If civilizations existed before us, perhaps they were erased by similar catastrophes. Imagine a thriving global society only to be obliterated by a 6-mile-wide rock from space. Their cities would be pulverized, their records destroyed, their survivors scattered into extinction. The only proof of their existence would be anomalies buried beneath the debris layer, anomalies we now misinterpret as natural oddities. Yet there is also a stranger possibility, that civilizations don't simply die, but vanish by choice. Perhaps they reach a level of advancement where remaining on Earth is no longer sustainable. They may leave the planet behind, migrating to the stars or retreating to hidden refuges deep beneath the Earth or oceans. If so, their disappearance would not be a collapse, but a departure. The absence of ruins could mean they took their knowledge and infrastructure with them, leaving behind only fragments too insignificant to erase. Ancient myths across cultures tell of gods or star people who once walked among humans and then withdrew, promising to return. Could these be distorted memories of civilizations that chose to vanish, leaving behind only stories for future species to inherit? The idea of deliberate vanishing grows more plausible when you consider secrecy. A civilization advanced enough to manipulate isotopes, engineer materials, or control climate would also understand the fragility of ecosystem. Perhaps they learned the hard way that revealing themselves or leaving too much behind could doom the species that followed. Instead, they may have concealed their presence, erasing their traces, dismantling their works, and retreating into obscurity. What we interpret as complete disappearance may actually be deliberate invisibility, a way of allowing Earth to reset without interference. If that's true, then the anomalies we find are not accidents, but leaks in a carefully maintained veil of secrecy. Signs that someone was here and chose to let us believe we are alone. Cycles of vanishing may also reflect something deeper, something woven into Earth's destiny itself. Perhaps civilizations are not allowed to persist indefinitely. The planet may be a kind of crucible, a place where intelligence arises again and again, but is always cut down once it reaches a certain threshold. This could be natural, as ecosystems collapse under the weight of unchecked growth. Or it could be engineered, an enforced cycle, where advanced civilizations are pruned before they become too powerful. If so, then vanishing is not a tragedy but a rule. We are simply the latest iteration, walking the same path toward disappearance. Our skyscrapers, satellites, and nuclear stockpiles may already be doomed to vanish, just as theirs did. It is worth asking, what would remain of us if we vanished tomorrow? Our cities would crumble in centuries, our satellites would fall in millennia, and our machines would corrode in tens of thousands of years. But the anomalies would last. The isotopes from our reactors and bombs would endure for millions of years. The plastics we scatter will become part of the rock record. Our extinction of species will leave a sharp, unmistakable break in the fossil record. To future beings, we would appear as a civilization that rose suddenly, reshaped the planet, and then vanished without a trace of who we were, just as we now see those who came before. In other words, we would become the very mystery we are now trying to solve. And that is perhaps the most haunting realization of all, that the story of vanishing civilizations is not their story, but ours. They are the ghosts of our future, the echoes of what we are about to become. We tell ourselves we are unique, the first and the last, destined to break the cycle, but the evidence in the rocks, in the fossils, in the anomalies tells a different story. It tells us that vanishing is not the exception but the rule, that Earth does not preserve civilizations but erases them, resetting the stage again and again. To ignore that is to ignore the warning etched into the very bones of our planet. So when we look at the fragments of those who came before, the isotopes in Gabon, the plastics in ancient sediments, the fossils that don't belong, we are not just looking at their story, we are looking at a mirror. We are seeing our future written in their disappearance. We too will vanish, our achievements will erode, our voices will fade, and the earth will bury us in silence. The only question is how. Will it be by our own hand, through nuclear fire or ecological collapse? Will it be by cosmic accident, an asteroid or solar flare beyond our control? Or will it be by choice, a deliberate retreat into secrecy or the stars? Whatever the answer, the outcome is the same. Civilizations rise, civilizations vanish, and the Earth goes on indifferent to the lives and stories it erases. The rocks do not lie. They hold the memory of vanishings, repeated countless times. And unless we learn from the whispers of the past, our own vanishing will be no different. Sudden, complete, and remembered only as anomalies that puzzle whoever comes after. When science searches for evidence of ancient civilizations, it turns to rocks, fossils, and isotopes. But human memory does not live in stone alone. It lives in stories, carried forward through myths, epics, and sacred texts. And though modern culture often dismisses myths as fantasy or allegory, they may in fact be the oldest records we have, distorted through generations of retelling, yet still containing fragments of truth. Around the world, cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, share uncanny parallels in their stories: floods that drowned entire worlds, gods who descended from the sky with strange technology, battles fought with weapons that sound like nuclear fire, and golden ages when humanity lived side by side with beings of immense knowledge. When these stories are placed against the anomalies in the physical record, they begin to look less like fiction and more like coded memory, the last surviving whispers of civilizations that vanished long before ours. Take the Great Flood, for example. It is one of the most universal myths on Earth. The Bible's account of Noah is the most famous, but it is only one of thousands. The Sumerians told of Ziusudra, warned by a god to build a massive boat before a flood destroyed the world. The Babylonians preserved a similar tale in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim survived by constructing an ark. In India, ancient texts describe Manu, saved by a divine being in the form of a fish, who warns him of the coming deluge. Indigenous peoples from the Americas, Australia, and Polynesia all tell their own flood stories, passed down across generations. How is it possible that cultures with no contact could invent the same tale? Mainstream explanations say these are simply cultural memories of local floods, magnified into myth, but the consistency is striking. The floods are always global, they always mark the end of an age, and they always preserve a chosen few to rebuild civilization. Could this be a memory, encoded in myth, of a real event when an advanced civilization perished under rising waters? Perhaps a sudden melt from an ice age, perhaps an engineered reset, or perhaps even a catastrophe triggered by their own technology. Whatever the cause, the story survives everywhere, a warning whispered through time. But floods are only one piece of the puzzle. Across cultures, we also find myths of beings descending from the sky, teaching humanity skills and knowledge we should not have had at the time. In Mesoamerica, the god Quetzalcoatl is said to have brought agriculture, mathematics, and astronomy. In Sumer, the Anunnaki are described as descending from the heavens to shape civilization, teaching humans writing, architecture, and laws. In India, the Vedic texts speak of devas and asuras waging wars with flying machines called vamanas, weapons that emitted light brighter than 1,000 suns, and technology far beyond what primitive societies should have imagined. Skeptics argue these are just symbolic tales, metaphors for natural forces, yet the details are too specific, too technological. Why would ancient people imagine flying machines, beams of light that incinerate cities, or gods who gift agriculture and metallurgy, unless they were remembering something real? Perhaps these myths are not inventions at all, but distorted records of contact with civilizations that existed long before our own, their knowledge passed down as divine gifts because ordinary people could not comprehend their origin. Then there are the epic battles described in texts like the Mahabharata. One passage speaks of a weapon so powerful it reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Undakas, with heat so intense it caused hair and nails to fall out, birds to drop from the sky, and food to become poison. The descriptions sound disturbingly like radiation sickness, fallout, and the after effects of nuclear detonation. Another section describes a weapon that created an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, followed by a wind that destroyed everything in its path. To a modern reader, this is less myth than a chillingly accurate description of nuclear war. If this were an isolated story, one could dismiss it as poetic imagination. But similar descriptions of fire from the sky and weapons of the gods appear in texts from Greece, Egypt, and even Norse mythology. Again and again, we find stories of civilizations destroyed by technologies indistinguishable from our own, their memory preserved not in science but in sacred texts. Ancient myths also preserve fragments of advanced knowledge that should not have been possible at the time. The Dogon tribe of Mali, for instance, had detailed astronomical knowledge of the Sirius star system, including the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye and undiscovered by modern science until the 19th. They claimed this knowledge was given to them by beings from the stars. Similarly, the Mayans built calendars of astonishing accuracy, predicting solar and lunar cycles with precision rivaling modern instruments. How could people with primitive tools and no telescopes calculate celestial events spanning centuries? Did they inherit this knowledge from an earlier civilization, one advanced enough to chart the heavens and pass on fragments of its wisdom in the form of myth? Even sacred architecture speaks through myth. The pyramids of Egypt are said in some traditions to have been built under the guidance of gods, not pharaohs. The colossal structures of South America, with stones weighing hundreds of tons fitted with laser-like precision, are often attributed to divine builders in local myths. Were these truly the works of primitive societies with copper chisels and ropes? Or were they inheriting the remnants of older civilizations, building upon foundations left behind? The myths tell us these works were not purely human, but inspired by knowledge that came from outside their time. Perhaps the gods of myth were simply the survivors of vanished civilizations, guiding humanity after their own collapse. What makes these myths especially compelling is their endurance. Unlike cities that crumble or tools that corrode, stories endure across generations, reshaped but never erased. Myths are the fossils of memory. They compress history into symbols, encode disasters into allegory, and transform technological marvels into divine miracles. When read literally, they seem fantastical, but when read as distorted memory, they align disturbingly well with the anomalies we find in geology and archaeology. Floods that match sudden sea level rises, weapons of fire that match isotopic fallout, beings from the sky that match advanced civilizations, or even survivors retreating to rebuild. Myths may not tell the whole truth, but they tell enough to point us toward it. The reluctance to see myths as history is understandable. To admit they may contain truth is to admit that our narrative is incomplete, that we are not the first and that we may not be the last. But ignoring them does not erase their consistency. Across every continent, across every culture, people told the same stories, of ages before ours, of civilizations destroyed, of knowledge passed down from beings who came before. It is too universal to dismiss, too coherent to be mere coincidence. Myths are not fantasies, they are survival. They are how knowledge persisted through cataclysm, how memory endured when civilizations vanished, how the ghosts of the past whispered to the future. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden in myths. They are not warnings written for the people of the past, but for us. They tell us that floods will come, that fire will fall, that civilizations will rise and collapse. They remind us that hubris is punished, that tampering with powers beyond our control leads to destruction, and that those who survive must carry forward the memory so the cycle can be understood. If we read them as allegory, we miss the message. If we read them as coded history, we see the truth. Myths are the records left behind by vanished civilizations, compressed into stories so they could endure when everything else was lost. We are quick to laugh at the ancients, to dismiss their tales as superstition. But one day, when our own civilization has vanished, what will remain of us? Perhaps only fragments of our stories, distorted into legend, retold by those who come after. Perhaps one day, another species will read about our own gods of fire, our machines that flew, and our floods that drowned the world, and they will debate whether these were allegories or truths. They will not know that we once existed, except for the myths we leave behind, just as we now struggle to decipher the myths of those who came before. When ancient people looked to the night sky, they did not see emptiness. They saw stories, maps, and warnings written in the stars. Constellations became gods, planets became omens, and comets were messengers of doom. But beyond the myth and poetry lies something stranger. Across cultures separated by vast oceans and epochs, the stars are remembered with astonishing precision, as if civilizations long before us possessed knowledge that should not have been possible without telescopes or advanced instruments. Even more unsettling, many of these myths suggest not only that the stars shaped human destiny, but that humanity itself came from the stars, that our origins and our fates are tied to cosmic cycles, perhaps even to civilizations that once flourished beyond Earth. The echoes in the stars are not just about navigation or storytelling. They may be the oldest record we have of contact, memory and legacy, written not in stone, but in the cosmos itself. Consider the Pleiades, the cluster of stars known as the Seven Sisters. Nearly every ancient culture tells a story about them. The Greeks spoke of the seven daughters of Atlas, pursued across the sky. The Japanese call them Subaru, and their name is still used by the car company whose logo bears the stars. Indigenous Australians have stories of seven sisters chased by hunters, while the Cherokee, the Maya, and the Egyptians all wove myths about this same cluster. Why would cultures separated by oceans all focus on the same tiny cluster of stars barely visible to the naked eye? Some researchers argue that these myths preserve a memory of something more, that the Pleiades are not just stars but markers of origin. The Dogon of Mali claim their ancestors came from Sirius, but they also revere the Pleiades, linking them to cycles of planting, fertility, and destiny. Astronomically, the Pleiades mark seasonal changes, but the obsession across the world suggests something deeper, as though ancient people knew these stars mattered in ways science has not yet fully explained. Could they be a memory of a place of origin, or even a marker left by civilizations that once reached for the stars themselves? The Dogon are perhaps the most famous example of star knowledge that should not have been possible. Long before modern telescopes, they described the Sirius system with accuracy that stunned 20th century anthropologists. They claimed Sirius had a companion star invisible to the eye but incredibly heavy, orbiting every 50 years. This matches exactly with Sirius B, a white dwarf confirmed by astronomers in the 80s. How could a pre-literate tribe in West Africa know details that required modern astrophysics to verify? The Dogon said the knowledge was given to them by beings from Sirius who came to Earth in ancient times. Skeptics argue the information must have been passed to them by modern visitors before anthropologists recorded it. But the consistency of their accounts, combined with their deep ceremonial traditions tied to Sirius, makes the story hard to dismiss. If nothing else, it shows that ancient people may have inherited fragments of astronomical knowledge from sources now forgotten. Sources advanced enough to know what only telescopes could later confirm. The Mayans also preserved echoes of the stars in their calendars. Their understanding of Venus was extraordinary. They tracked its movements with an accuracy of within one day over centuries, despite having no telescopes. They timed wars, sacrifices, and festivals to Venus's cycles, believing it was tied to the fate of rulers and empires. Why Venus? Because it is the brightest object in the sky after the sun and moon, yes, but also because Venus is associated with catastrophe in many myths, often described as a wandering star that brought chaos. Some researchers suggest the Mayans inherited this obsession from an earlier civilization, one that may have witnessed planetary events we no longer understand. Perhaps they saw a close approach, a cometary body mistaken for Venus, or even astronomical events tied to a prior collapse. The Mayans' Venus tables were not just myth, they were precise, scientific, and far beyond what their supposed level of technology should have achieved. Egypt provides another layer of intrigue. The pyramids of Giza are aligned with uncanny accuracy to the cardinal directions, but more than that, their layout mirrors the belt of Orion. Ancient Egyptian texts tell us the pyramids were built under the stars, with Orion associated with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid point directly toward Orion and Sirius, as if the builders wanted to connect Earth with specific stars. Mainstream archaeologists say this is coincidence or symbolic, but the precision is too exact, the alignment too deliberate. Why would ancient builders go to such lengths unless they believed those stars were central to human destiny? Perhaps they were not worshipping the stars, but remembering them, remembering a connection, a place of origin, or a civilization that came before, tied in some way to Orion and Sirius. Even myths of cataclysm often have astronomical echoes. Many cultures link great floods, fires, or collapses with stars or celestial events. The Hopi speak of cycles of worlds, destroyed one after another, each reset by floods or fire from the sky. The Norse told of Ragnarok, when the stars would fall and the sky would burn. The Aztecs spoke of suns, ages of humanity destroyed, each ruled by a different star or element. These stories may not be allegory at all, but memory of real astronomical catastrophes, impacts, solar flares, or cosmic encounters that reset civilizations. The stars in this sense are not just distant lights, but agents of destiny, forces that shape and erase civilization. There is also the question of why so many ancient structures align with celestial markers. Stonehenge aligns with solstices. The temples of Angkor in Cambodia align with constellations. The Nazca lines in Peru stretch for miles, some pointing to constellations visible thousands of years ago. Were these merely agricultural calendars, or were they attempts to record something greater, knowledge inherited from civilizations that had already mapped the stars long before history began? The sheer global consistency suggests that the night sky was not just a canvas for imagination, but a message board, a place where truths about origins and cycles were preserved. If a prior civilization vanished, leaving only myths and alignments, then the stars may have been their way of ensuring their memory endured. The unsettling thought is that perhaps civilizations vanish, not only because of self-destruction, but because of cosmic cycles. Every 26,000 years, Earth completes a precessional cycle, shifting the orientation of its axis. This alters which stars dominate the night sky, and many myths tie directly to these cycles. Could it be that civilizations rise and fall with the stars, each cycle marking a new beginning and an end for those who came before? If so, then our obsession with the stars is not just poetic, it is survival. The echoes in the stars are warnings, reminders that the cosmos itself may govern the rhythm of civilizations on Earth. Even today, we search the stars for answers. We send probes, we listen for signals, we dream of finding other civilizations. But perhaps the truth is that we don't need to look outward at all. The stars have already spoken to us through myths, alignments, and knowledge preserved against impossible odds. They tell us we are not the first. They tell us civilizations rise, look to the stars, and vanish, leaving only fragments behind. And they tell us that the cycle will continue, that we too will one day become nothing more than an echo written in myths and constellations for whoever comes after. The night sky is not empty, it is full of memory, and if we have the courage to listen, it may reveal that our story is not unique, but part of a cosmic pattern repeating endlessly. Civilizations rising and falling in harmony with the stars above. For all the anomalies we've explored, strange isotopes, synthetic materials, myths of fire and flood, there is one final thread that ties them together: silence. Again and again, discoveries surface that challenge the accepted story of human history, only to be dismissed, ignored, or buried. Sometimes this happens because the evidence is fragmentary, difficult to prove, or too strange to fit into established frameworks. But sometimes the silencing feels deliberate, as though there are forces that do not want us to remember what came before. Archaeological discoveries that should rewrite history instead vanish into obscurity, dismissed as hoaxes or locked away in collections never to be studied again. This pattern suggests that the biggest secret about ancient civilizations is not just that they may have existed, but that their traces are still being found and hidden in plain sight. Consider the so-called Baghdad battery, discovered in Iraq in the 1930s. At first glance, it looks like a simple clay jar, but inside were a copper cylinder and an iron rod, arranged in a way that, when filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, could generate an electrical charge. In other words, it was a battery, 2,000 years old at least, possibly much older. Skeptics say it was used for storage or ritual, yet experiments show it could have produced electricity, enough to power small tools or electroplate metals. If true, it suggests that ancient people had at least a practical understanding of electricity, but the discovery was quickly sidelined, treated as a curiosity rather than a revelation. How many other objects like it might exist, reinterpreted or ignored because they don't fit the narrative that electricity was only mastered in modern times? Or take the Antikythera mechanism, a device discovered in a shipwreck off Greece, dated to around 100 BCE. It is a complex system of gears and dials capable of predicting eclipses and planetary motions with astonishing accuracy. For decades, mainstream scholars dismissed it as an anomaly, a piece of technology too advanced for its time. Some even suggested it must have been a hoax. Only with modern scanning technology did researchers finally admit its sophistication, calling it the world's first computer. But if one such device existed, how many more were there? Was the Antikythera mechanism truly unique, or simply one survivor of a technological tradition erased from history? The fact that it took over a century for academia to even admit its significance shows how uncomfortable such finds are for the accepted timeline. Then there are discoveries that vanish altogether. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Reports circulated of giant skeletons unearthed across North America, some standing over 10 feet tall. Newspaper articles, museum records, and eyewitness accounts describe excavations of massive bones, skulls with double rows of teeth, and skeletons far beyond the size of normal humans. Many of these remains were allegedly sent to institutions like the Smithsonian, where they disappeared. Today, such stories are dismissed as exaggerations or fabrications, but the consistency of the reports across different states and decades is suspicious. Were these skeletons real? And if so, why were they hidden? Did they threaten the accepted narrative of human origins too profoundly to be acknowledged? Another silenced discovery lies in the tunnels and caves beneath ancient sites. In places like Giza, Egypt, explorers have long spoken of sealed passages and vast subterranean chambers that remain off-limits to the public. Some claim these chambers contain artifacts or records older than dynastic Egypt, pointing to a civilization predating the pharaohs. Yet official excavations rarely confirm these claims, and when evidence surfaces, it is quickly dismissed. Similar stories emerge from South America, where legends of underground cities filled with gold and strange artifacts persist. Expeditions that report such finds are often discredited or silenced, their evidence lost. It raises the unsettling question: what lies sealed beneath the world's great monuments, hidden away not by time but by deliberate choice? Even in more recent times, discoveries that challenge mainstream history are often ridiculed into obscurity. The Ica stones of Peru, engraved with images of dinosaurs, advanced surgery, and astronomical knowledge, are dismissed as hoaxes, yet the sheer number of stones, thousands of them, suggest something more than mere forgery. The dropper stones of China, said to describe contact with beings from the stars, are similarly ignored, treated as folklore despite detailed accounts from the 20th century. Whether authentic or not, the consistent pattern is clear. When artifacts emerge that suggest civilizations before us, they are ridiculed, hidden, or forgotten. Why this silence? Some argue it is simple academic conservatism. Scholars build their careers on established frameworks, and anomalies threaten those foundations. Admitting the existence of advanced civilizations before recorded history would force a rewriting of textbooks, a collapse of certainty, and a reshaping of human identity. It is easier to dismiss uncomfortable evidence than to grapple with its implications. Others suggest darker motives, that governments and institutions deliberately suppress such finds because they threaten religious, political, or social stability. If people believed we were not the first, if they realized civilizations rise and fall in cycles, how would that change our sense of destiny? Would it destabilize the illusion of progress that modern society depends on? The truth may lie somewhere between. Some anomalies are certainly hoaxes, others are misinterpretations of natural phenomena, but the sheer volume of silenced discoveries suggests a pattern too consistent to ignore. Again and again, the world is confronted with evidence that does not fit, and again, that evidence disappears into obscurity. The cycle of discovery, dismissal, and silence mirrors the larger cycle of civilizations, rising and vanishing. Just as ancient societies erased themselves, so too does our own society erase their memory. It is almost as if there is a built-in resistance to remembering, a force that ensures the past remains hidden until the cycle repeats. What makes this especially haunting is how much it mirrors the future. Imagine millions of years from now, if another species digs through our remains, they will find fragments of plastic, isotopic spikes, perhaps the fossilized remnants of our machines. But will they believe in us? Or will their scholars dismiss these anomalies as curiosities, hoaxes, or natural oddities? They may read myths of our existence, laugh at stories of flying machines and nuclear fire, and insist we could not have existed. In other words, they will repeat the same silencing we perform today. The suppression of anomalous discoveries is not just an accident, it is part of the cycle. Each civilization denies the memory of the last, leaving only whispers for the future to rediscover. The silenced discoveries remind us of a truth too large to face, that history is not linear, and we are not unique. We are not the first to build, to invent, to reach for the stars. We are not the first to fall either. The artifacts hidden away, the skeletons erased, the mechanisms dismissed, they all testify that others have walked this path before. Their memory has been buried, not just by time, but by our own refusal to see. And unless we confront that silence, we will vanish the same way they did, leaving only fragments for others to ignore. The silence is not just about the past, it is about us. It is a mirror held up to our own denial, our refusal to see the patterns written into the earth itself. The silenced archaeological discoveries are not just about what was lost, they are about what we are losing now, and what will be silenced when our own cycle ends. If there is one thread woven through all these mysteries, fossils that don't belong, isotopes that whisper of vanished technologies, myths that encode cosmic truths, and discoveries silenced by those who guard the narrative, it is that we are not the beginning of the story. We are only the latest chapter in a book that has been written and erased countless times before. The Earth remembers, even when we forget. Its rocks preserve anomalies, its fossils conceal whispers, its myths echo with the warnings of civilizations lost to time. What we mistake for coincidences or curiosities are fragments of a history too vast for us to comprehend. A history that insists we are walking a path already traveled. Civilizations rise, they reach, they fall, and they vanish. The silence that follows is not proof of absence, but proof of how thorough the Earth is at erasing, how fragile our works truly are when measured against the abyss of time. And yet, even as the planet erases, it leaves behind clues for those who dare to look. A shoe print pressed into ancient rock, a hammer sealed in stone, a myth retold in 1,000 voices across the globe, a star alignment encoded into massive monuments. These are not accidents, they are the fingerprints of those who came before, preserved by chance or by design, waiting for us to notice. But the danger is not that we fail to see them. The danger is that we dismiss them, that we bury them under the weight of skepticism, fear, or denial. Because to accept them is to accept that our story is not unique, that our time here is not permanent, and that we too will one day be reduced to anomalies in the dirt, puzzles for someone else to solve. The greatest tragedy of vanished civilizations is not that they disappeared, it is that their warnings have been ignored. Myths of floods, tales of fire from the sky, cycles of rise and collapse. They are not entertainment, they are memory. They are the messages left behind by survivors, encoded in the only medium that could endure, story. If we dismiss them as allegory, we miss their meaning. If we embrace them as history, we see what they are trying to tell us, that we are repeating the same mistakes, walking the same road, and heading toward the same silence. Perhaps that is why so many discoveries are silenced. Not because they are false, but because they are because to admit the truth would force us to confront our fragility, to face the inevitability of cycles, to acknowledge that progress is not linear but circular, and that we are closer to collapse than we dare to believe. It is easier to bury the evidence, to call it a hoax, to dismiss the myths, than to see them as a mirror, but denial does not erase destiny. The cycle does not care whether we believe in it, and so the question remains, will we listen? Will we look at the anomalies not as curiosities but as warnings? Will we take the myths not as fantasy but as survival guides passed through time? Or will we, like those before us, ignore the signs, overreach and vanish, leaving only fragments of plastic, isotopes and fossils that don't belong for the next civilization to puzzle over? The Earth has seen this story play out countless times, and it will see it again. The only variable is us. If we have the courage to learn from the whispers of the past, perhaps we can break the cycle. If not, then we are only writing another chapter that ends in silence. The conclusion is not written yet, but the evidence is clear. We are not the first, and if we are not careful, we will not be the last.